My name is Margaret Ellis, and this winter is my first Christmas without Richard. We were married for 48 years, and until last March, I thought we still had more time, more mornings with coffee in the kitchen, more evenings when he'd fall asleep halfway through a movie. But life didn't ask me. It just took him. I decided I wouldn't let the holiday pass in an empty house. So I invited my son David and his wife Lauren for a quiet Christmas dinner. No fuss, no big crowd, just us. I spent 2 days preparing the way Richard used to like it. A honey-glazed ham with pineapple rings, mashed potatoes whipped until they were silk green, bean casserole done just right. The whole house smelled like cinnamon and sugar by the time I was done. The tree was fresh this year, a Douglas fir I picked out myself. I strung it with old ornaments, David's macaroni star from 2nd grade, the glass snowflake Richard once glued back together after I dropped it, our wedding photo framed in red. I even put on the red dress Richard always said made me look like Christmas morning, the one with pearl buttons. My hair was set lipstick on a table laid with our best china. Dinner was set for 3 o'clock. At 2:30, I sent David a quick text. "See you soon." No reply. By 3, I was at the front window watching for headlights. At 3:15, I told myself maybe they were just running late. By 3:30, I had the rolls back in the oven to keep warm. At 3:45, the doorbell rang. My heart lifted until I opened the door to a young courier in a windbreaker. He handed me a manila envelope with my name written in Lauren's looping handwriting. Inside, a single card. "Margaret, we're so sorry. We decided to spend Christmas at my mom's house this year. Last minute change. Hope you understand. Love, Lauren." I stood in the open doorway, the cold creeping through my sleeves, holding that envelope like it weighed 100 B. Somewhere in town, my son was sitting at a table filled with people, just not mine. And in that moment, I realized this Christmas would be nothing like the ones before. I closed the door slowly, the click of the latch sounding louder than it should. The house still smelled of baked ham and warm bread, but the air felt colder, now heavier. I walked back into the dining room, the candle still flickering on the table I had set hours ago. 3 plates silver polished until it gleamed, napkins folded the way Richard liked, like little envelopes. 2 of them would stay empty tonight. I sat down at my place at the head of the table, the one Richard always claimed I belonged in, and tried to take a bite. The ham was perfect, tender. Just the right amount of sweetness, but it might as well have been cardboard. My throat wouldn't let me swallow. I sipped a little sweet tea, hoping it would help, but it didn't. Across the table, the chair where David should have been sat in silence. I imagined him laughing at something Lauren's mother said, leaning back with that easy grin of his. Maybe they were already on dessert by now, coffee cups in hand. My own pecan pie cooled on the counter, wouldn't be touched tonight. I pushed back from the table, the scrape of the chair against the floor, startling in the quiet. The food went into containers one by one, lids snapping shut. The ham, the mashed potatoes, the rolls I'd brushed with butter just before the doorbell rang. I left the pie where it was a small act of defiance against the emptiness. When the last dish was packed away, I turned off the music and blew out the candles. The room fell into stillness, the kind that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I went to the living room and sat on the couch, the Christmas tree lights twinkling softly. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't about one dinner. This had been building for years, quiet shift by quiet shift, and I had just been too willing to pretend otherwise. The phone stayed silent. No call, no text, just me, the tree and the hollow space between what I had hoped for and what was real. I didn't go to bed right away. Instead, I sat in the glow of the tree, watching the lights blink in slow rhythm, each flash, stirring up memories I hadn't planned to revisit. My eyes drifted to the photo of Richard and me on our 35th anniversary, framed in silver on the mantel. We were standing on the boardwalk that summer, the ocean behind us, his arm slung over my shoulder like it had been there all my life. Back then, Christmas meant early mornings with David tearing through wrapping paper, more interested in the mess than the gifts. Richard would string lights on the porch while I baked sugar cookies, and by evening, We'd be crowded on the couch, a blanket over our laps, watching the same holiday movies we'd seen 100 times. But somewhere along the way, the rhythm changed. The first year after David married Lauren, they spent the holiday with her parents. I understood newlyweds need their own traditions. The next year was the same. Then the year after that, they'd stop by my place a few days. Later, bringing leftovers from Lauren's mother's kitchen, smiling as if that was enough. I told myself not to be the kind of mother who clings too tight. But each time they came, they stayed a little shorter, as if there was somewhere better they had to be. Lauren never offered to help in the kitchen, her eyes glued to her phone while David hovered, waiting for her signal it was time to go. Last year, they'd arrived 2 hours late, already full from a meal elsewhere. They poked at the food I'd made, offered polite compliments, and left before dessert. I thought maybe this year would be different. I thought losing Richard might remind them how quickly time slips away, how important it is to hold on to what's left. I thought they'd come sit at my table and we'd share something real again, but tonight had proven me wrong. And as I looked around at the quiet house, I realized the change hadn't started tonight. It had just finally finished. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Sleep had been shallow, broken by stretches of staring at the ceiling, my mind chasing the same thought in circles. When did I stop being part of their picture? I wrapped myself in Richard's old cardigan, the one still faintly smelling of cedar, and stepped outside. The yard was quiet under a thin crust of frost, each blade of grass sparkling in the early light. My breath hung in the air as I followed the flagstone path toward the bird feeder Richard had built from scrapwood. That feeder had been his Saturday ritual. Even in the coldest months, he'd bundle up, refill it, and stand there a while, watching cardinals and chickies dart in for their breakfast. I reached up to brush away some ice from the little roof, and that's when I saw it. Something tucked between the post and the wood, an envelope, edges slightly weathered, but sealed tight. My name was written across the front in his handwriting. Just Margaret. No last name, no address. My fingers trembled as I pulled it free. Inside was a single line ink, slightly faded. If you're reading this, go to the desk, top drawer. Back inside, I didn't even take off my coat. I went straight to Richard's desk in the study, the one I'd hardly touched since he passed. The top drawer slid open easily, and taped to the underside of the panel was another envelope, thicker than the first, with a small brass key clipped to it. The note inside was short. If they ever shut you out, this will make sense. It's yours. Always was. You just didn't know it. Beneath the note was a folded legal document, a deed with my name on it. The address was unfamiliar, somewhere in the hills outside Rutland. I'd never heard Richard mention owning another property. I sat there for a long moment, the key heavy in my hand. Whatever this was, he had planned it for me. And something in my chest told me it was time to find out why. By mid-AM morning, I had a small overnight bag packed, just a change of clothes, my wool coat, a flashlight, and a thermos of coffee. Richard used to say, "You should always carry more than you think you'll need, just in case." I slipped the brass key into my pocket and set the address into my GPS. 42 minutes, it told me. 42 minutes to a place my husband had kept secret. The drive took me through winding back roads lined with bare maple trees, their limbs black against the winter sky. Snow clung to the ditches, the kind that refuses to melt until spring. When I turned off the main road, the gravel crunched under my tires, leading me down a lane with no street sign. At the end sat a small cedar-sided house with green shutters and a stone chimney. Smoke wasn't coming from it, but somehow the place didn't feel abandoned. I climbed the porch steps, the wood creaking softly under my boots. The key slid into the lock as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, the air was cool, but clean, faintly scented with pine. The first thing I saw was the living room and the photos. Frames lined the mantel above a brick fireplace, Richard and me on our wedding day, David as a toddler, our family at the lake one summer. Some of those photos I hadn't seen in years. The furniture was familiar too. The quilt from our old guest room. The coffee table Richard had refinished one winter when the shop was slow. In the corner stood his favorite reading chair, the cushion slightly indented as if he just stood up. On the coffee table lay a folded note. "This is yours if they ever forget who you are." I sank into the chair, the paper trembling in my hand. He had built this not just a house, but a refuge, a place where I was still seen, still known. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was on the outside looking in. 2 days after I found the house, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something nudged me to answer. "Mrs. Ellis." The voice was warm, measured. "My name is Thomas Harris. I was your husband's accountant." I sat down at the kitchen table. "Yes. Mr. Harris, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Richard left me with very specific instructions to contact you, only if circumstances changed, if something didn't feel quite right with the family." He paused as though giving me space to speak. I thought of the envelope from Lauren, the empty table. "Things have changed," I said quietly. "Then I think we should meet." The next afternoon, I found myself in a small office above a bakery downtown. Harris was older than I'd expected, late 60s maybe, with silver hair and clear blue eyes. He greeted me with a firm handshake and pulled a slim black folder from his desk. "Richard was a prudent man," he began. "5 years ago, he moved a portion of his retirement into a separate trust in your name only. It's not tied to the family accounts." I frowned. "I didn't know about this. He didn't want you to until you needed to. There's roughly $700,000 in it now, plus another $80,000 in a private savings account. Both are yours alone." I sat back, stunned. "There's more," Harris said, sliding several photocopied emails across the desk. "Your son contacted Richard multiple times asking to restructure assets for easier management. He also implied you might not be able to handle things on your own in the future." The last page made my hands tighten. It was a copy of a check withdrawal, $15,000 from my joint account, my signature forged. The funds had gone to a property in New Hampshire under Lauren's name. Richard confronted them quietly, Harris said. After that, he began moving assets where they couldn't touch them. He wanted you to be protected. I left the office with the folder pressed against my chest, my pulse steadying into something new, resolve. I pulled into my driveway just as the sun was dipping behind the rooftops. The air was sharp, the kind that nipped at your cheeks and made your breath visible. That's when I noticed a dark SUV idling across the street. David's. I stepped out of my car folder, still in my hand, and walked up the porch steps. Before I could get the key in the lock, I heard footsteps behind me. "Mom," David said, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. I turned. "David." He gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We need to talk." I opened the door just enough for my body to block the entrance. "About what Christmas?" He started glancing toward the SUV where I could see Lauren's silhouette in the passenger seat. "Things got busy. Lauren thought it'd be easier to spend it at her mom's this year. We didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. You could have called," I said evenly. "I know, and that's on me." He shifted his weight. "Actually, I wanted to ask if you needed help with Dad's accounts. I've been going through some old files and thought maybe." "What made you think I needed help?" I asked. His eyes flickered. "We've just been worried. You've been quiet, and you mean the property in New Hampshire I cut in?" He froze. "Or the $15,000 check with my name on it that I never signed." His mouth opened, then closed again. I stepped back, my hand still on the door. "You weren't checking on me, David. You were checking on what I have, and you should know your father made sure I don't need you to manage anything for me." He looked away, jaw tight. "Go home," I said. "Tell Lauren I said hello." Without another word, he turned and walked back to the SUV. I watched it back out and disappear down the street, the night, swallowing it whole. 2 mornings later, the phone rang just after sunrise. I was still in my robe, nursing my first cup of coffee when I saw the name flash across the screen. Irene Walters. She'd been my neighbor for over 20 years, the kind of woman who could smell trouble before it reached the end of the block. "Margaret," she said without preamble, "have you heard what Lauren's been saying?" My stomach tightened. "What now?" "She's telling people, mostly her side of the family, that you're not well, that you might need someone to step in legally." Irene's voice sharpened. A cousin of mine heard it from her sister-in-law who still works down at the county clerk's office. I stared out the kitchen window at the frost-covered garden, so she's laying groundwork. That's exactly what she's doing, Irene said. And if she gets serious, they could try to have you declared unfit to handle your own affairs. It should have shocked me, but it didn't. It just made the air in the room feel colder. She's clever, I murmured. Always careful not to get her hands dirty. Not clever enough to think you'll just roll over, Irene shot back. I'll be over in an hour. We're putting this in writing. By 10 o'clock, she was at my kitchen table with a laptop, a folder of legal templates, and a loaf of her cornbread. We drafted a formal statement, clear and firm I was of sound mind, fully capable of managing my own life, and any attempt to challenge that would be met with legal resistance. We included a signed statement from my doctor dated just last month, attesting to my mental and physical health. At the bottom, in my own handwriting, I added, I am not confused, I am not unstable, I am simply done being treated like an afterthought. When we were done, we sent certified copies to both David and Lauren. As I watched the envelope slide into the outgoing mail tray, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was closing the door they'd been trying to wedge open for years. A week later, on a quiet afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I looked through the window, I saw Thomas Harris standing there, a small cardboard box in his hands. I hope I'm not intruding, he said when I opened the door. Richard gave me this the week before he passed. He told me not to hand it over until I thought you were ready. I stepped aside to let him in. And you think I'm ready now? He gave a small, knowing smile. I do. We sat at the kitchen table. The box was about the size of a shoebox, taped neatly my name written across the top in Richard's steady handwriting. I didn't open it until Harris had left. He said it was something personal meant for me alone. Inside was a dark green leather journal, edges worn smooth from handling. On the first page in his handwriting, Richard had written, If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say all this out loud. So, here it is, all of it. I turned the pages slowly. The first entries were simple. What he'd cooked that day, a joke he'd heard at the hardware store, a memory about the summer we took David to the Grand Canyon, but as the months went on, the tone changed. He wrote about his worries not about dying, but about me after he was gone. He'd noticed David pulling away, how Lauren made him feel like visiting me was an obligation instead of a choice. He wrote that I was the strongest person he knew, but that strong people sometimes hide their hurt too well. Halfway through, one entry stopped me cold. If you ever find yourself sitting at our table in that red dress, waiting for someone who never shows, remember, it's not because of you. They left, but you are still here, and you are still enough. I closed the journal, holding it to my chest. The house was quiet, but for the first time in months, it didn't feel empty. 1 year later, Christmas morning dawned with a pale gold light spilling over the hills. The cedar house smelled of cinnamon and roasted sweet potatoes. In the kitchen, music played low while I arranged pies on the windowsill to cool. This year, the guest list was different on purpose. A few women from the quilting group in town, a young couple who'd just moved in down the road, and 3 kids from the church art program who had nowhere else to go today. People who had said yes without hesitation when I invited them. By noon, the driveway was filling with cars. Laughter and voices trailed in through the open door as coats were hung and hats tossed into the basket by the stairs. One of the boys, 8-year-old Oliver, ran straight to the tree and pointed, "You got real candy canes. That's the only way to do it," I said, smiling. The table was full within minutes. Every chair taken, every place setting used. Irene was fussing over the gravy, insisting it needed just a pinch more salt while someone passed around fresh rolls. Conversation flowed like it hadn't in years, crisscrossing the table with stories, jokes, and the occasional burst of singing when a favorite carol played in the background. At 3 o'clock, right as we were pouring coffee, the mail arrived. On top of the stack was a cream envelope with my name and David's handwriting. Inside was a simple card. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Hope you're doing well, David and Lauren." No apology, no invitation, No mention of last year. I slipped it into the drawer beside the fridge without a word. Looking around at the full table, I felt no emptiness, no ache in my chest. This was a different kind of family, one built not from blood alone, but from people who showed up. Outside, snow had begun to fall in soft flakes, catching the glow from the porch light. I thought of Richard's journal of the line he'd written about being enough, and realized I finally believed it. After dessert, the kids bundled into coats and spilled out onto the porch with sticks of chalk I'd tucked into their gift bags. Within minutes, the walkway was a patchwork of snow angels and uneven stars, the kind only a child's hand can make. From the kitchen came the sound of Irene laughing loud and unrestrained at something Gloria from the quilting group had just said. I stepped outside with a glass of red wine, letting the cold bite at my cheeks. The sky was streaked with soft pink and silver, the last of the daylight folding into night. From here, I could see through the wide front window into the dining room. The table was still full, hands reaching for seconds, heads tipped back in laughter, crumbs and half-empty mugs scattered across the cloth. I settled into Richard's old rocking chair, the one we'd moved here from, our first house, and pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. Last year, I had sat in a different house, in a different chair, staring at an empty table laid for people who never planned to come. Now the table before me wasn't just physically different. It was something I'd built out of choice, not habit. A place for those who wanted to be here, not those who felt obliged. I thought of David's card in the drawer. It would stay there untouched, not out of anger, but because I no longer needed it to mean anything. The porch light flickered on, casting a warm circle across the steps. Somewhere inside, someone started humming Silent Night, and others joined in their voices, carrying out into the cold air. Richard's words from the journal came back to me. If they choose to walk out of your life, let them. What's meant to stay will. I took a slow sip of wine, feeling the warmth spread through me, and looked once more at the glowing table inside. This was my table, now filled with the kind of love that shows up, and for the first time in a long time, I knew I was exactly where I belonged.